welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page, and our author guest today is
Natasha Joukovsky. The Portrait of Emir is my debut novel. It comes out from the Overlook Press on June 1st, 2021.
And it's got a lot in it. It's really like it's really just this whole tour de art and myth and modern society and characters you sometimes want to punch, but not always. And it is centered a bit around the Narcissus myth, as you might imagine, because when you're looking at the title, it literally has the painting.
Yes.
Famous Narcissus painting on it. So first of all, tell us a little bit about your background and then where you came up with the idea for the story.
Sure. My background is actually in two places that feature in the novel, professionally speaking. So I started my career working in major museums. I spent the first 5 years of my career working at the Philadelphia Museum of Art and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York before going to business school to get an MBA, not an MFA, and switching into a career in management consulting. And I spent, I guess I've been in the consulting space at Accenture since 2014.
Have you always wanted to write a novel, and how did all of that bring you to write this one?
Yeah, so I have always wanted to write a novel. I would say that the novel isn't the surprise. The pivot into business and the consulting world is what was unexpected for me. I majored in English as an undergrad at UVA. My father's an English professor. I grew up around books. He specializes in 18th and 19th century British literature. So I grew up reading Jane Austen, Fielding, Joyce. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on Ulysses and the Wasteland. And I was really thinking when I was writing The Portrait of Emir about honestly, the whole canon of literature. My goal was to write a book that was almost like sneakily literary. So that would operate on fundamentally two levels. I was really, really inspired by T.S. Eliot's criticism around tradition and the individual talent and the mythical method that he so appreciated in Ulysses and Joyce's work. And I wanted to create something that was elusive in the same way that Ulysses is, and kind of full of puzzles in the same way, but that it could also be read on a much more superficial level. So you could get the surface, or you could jump into the pool and enjoy it fully either way.
It's a lot of fun, and I think you had I feel like you had a lot of fun writing it.
I did. I mean, it's the first novels are famously self-portrait like, I guess I'll say, and The Portrait of Emir is certainly in some ways a self-portrait, and the book that I've always thought that I'd write first. And so yeah, I did. I mean, it took a long time, so that part wasn't always the most fun, but I did enjoy writing it and the process. I think you kind of have to in order to go straight into a novel without having written much else.
So the opening line of this book is great. There's no greater compliment in this world than being the uncooperative catalyst of another person's misery, if not all-out self-destruction. I am a first line person, where did that one come from? And I want to get into why specifically Narcissus and why specifically this time period that you chose.
Yeah. Okay. So these are three really good questions in succession. So I guess I'll take them in order. So the first sentence, I am like you, I guess, a first sentence junkie. So I had all the great first sentences in my mind. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a wife. Stately plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead bearing a bowl of lather on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. All happy families are alike, right? I wanted the novel to start with like a real 19th century bang kind of thing, I guess, because I mean, again, going back to Eliot and tradition and the individual talent, I wanted the novel to be temporal and timeless, to be extremely rooted in a specific moment, specifically the Obama era, but also have that kind of very grand, ambitious feel, because it was, I wanted to write a really ambitious novel, and for I think the first sentence kind of sets the tone in that and what you're getting into from a maximalist, like old school perspective in terms of the style, and then quickly pivots into the much more modern day interpretation of that. Yeah, so the time period, originally I started writing the novel in earnest in 2015, and I was just thinking that it was going to be a contemporary novel. It turned into more than that when I really picked up steam on it right around Trump's election. And ultimately, in retrospect, I feel like the Obama era is even more perfect for this book, because it's set at the very moment that famous Caravaggio painting captures, like the height of your infatuation and superficial love of Narcissus's superficial love of himself, right before the pivotal moment where
everything crashes.
yeah, that narcissism is actually an existential threat, right?
Right. Yes. Oh, lovely. Wow. That was more beautifully put than I could imagine.
And in terms of the Narcissus myth specifically, I mean, speaking of Trump as well, I think there are few myths that more capture our contemporary moment between between the rise in dictators around the world, not just Trump, but including Trump, and megalomaniac narcissists, the rise of social media and selfies, and just the importance of and commoditization of the self in all aspects of our lives. Social media it's so funny. It's always billed as a tool for connection, but I think that it has evolved much more into a way to brand and expose yourself in a very, very mannered way. And I mean, that goes to the style of the novel too. Like, I wanted it to be realistic but mannered, so like realistic but with a filter. and that creating that balance was part of it too. I started getting interested in the myth of Narcissus as an undergrad when I took a seminar on art and myth about Ovid's Metamorphoses and all of the related art. Many of the one of the characters, Vivien, is a curator in the novel, and much of the material around her lectures, around the materials that are hung in the exhibition, the little blurbs about various paintings, are taken directly from papers that I wrote in college. So a lot of this stuff goes back.
And and having worked in art museums, I mean, I have to say, like, the Metropolitan Museum of Art is like one of the reasons I actually got into library science, because I so wanted to be an archivist there. And not that I'm disappointed at all in the path that my my profession, my career took. But I mean, pre-pandemic, if there was a place that I could go that I just want, I mean, the city has its quiet places and it has its chaos, but like if I ever had time to myself in the city and I just needed some time to unplug and take it all in, that's where I would go. Kind of brought some of that into the story. And I think you make like a really good point just about social media and just the idea of echo. Our Narcissus falls in love with himself, but Echo falls in love with him, and Echo can only repeat, which seems all sorts of metaphorically social media in general.
Absolutely. And one of the major themes of the novel is recursion. And that's one of the kind of, I think, enduring aspects of the Myth of Narcissus is all of the recursive images and themes. And if you don't know what recursion is, I didn't until around the time I was writing this book, but I didn't realize that it's one of the reasons I'd always been attracted to the Myth of Narcissus. Recursion is effectively any instance of self-similar embedded repetition, and it can be found all sorts of places, but one of the biggest that, including art, nature, fractals are recursive, but one of the biggest areas that you see it in is in computer algorithms. And all of the forces that the capitalist forces we see in our society around the centralization of wealth and power and attention, the way things go viral is all a function of echo chamber like recursion. And I really think it's one of the fundamental attributes of our modern digital world.
And now I'm thinking of a sci-fi version of Narcissus where Echo is a bot.
Yeah, well, so it's funny, actually, the working title of The Portrait of a Mirror was Recursion until Blake Crouch's book
I was
came
going
out.
to say, you missed that by this much.
But actually, my husband jokes that his book coming out is I cried a lot at first, and I did enjoy the book quite a bit.
It is a very good book, yes.
But my husband jokes that it's the best thing that ever happened to me that his book came out, because my book is not about aliens.
I think A Portrait of a Mirror is a very good title for it. It also made me think of a few years back, they tried to do an updated version of My Fair Lady called Selfie, where the main character was the Eliza character was self-obsessed and social media obsessed. And I think there was even in the opening sequence a picture of, a take on the Narcissus, the same portrait of, looking into. So it fit very well for me. And it was one of the things that really grabbed me when I got all of these arcs, and I'm like, which one am I going to read first? And I'm like, clearly this one.
Thank you.
So your four main characters. So, okay. Yes. So we have Wes, we have Diana, who is Wes's wife. Now, when I first started reading about Wes, I would have imagined that he wouldn't be married, but he is married to Diana. And Diana seems to be like, she could not care less about being married to Wes, is the feeling that I got from her in general. Maybe she could care a little bit less.
So, I mean, maybe I should step back and kind of introduce the four.
Yes, please do.
Characters, but you have Wes, like you said, and Diana, who live in New York City. They've been married for a couple of years. Wes is from a stratospherically wealthy Vanderbilt type family who's experienced a fall from grace, and perhaps in trying to compensate for that, has been working overtime to build his tech startup at the expense of his marriage, which, to your point on Diana not being super pleased with that. I was just gonna say, she's younger. She's a couple years out of college. she's working as an enterprise architect at a big management consultancy and traveling week in, week out. So she's not seeing Wes as much because he's working all the time. And the novel opens with her heading out the door to start a new project in Philadelphia, where the second couple lives. Vivien and Dale are in their early 30s and in the process of planning their much anticipated wedding. Dale is a strategy consultant at the same firm as Diana and ends up on the same new project with her, while Vivien is a curator at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, as I mentioned before, who just launched an exhibition as a visiting curator at the Met, where, given 1% is a very small place, and this is a novel about 1% sort of people, they went to boarding school together, Vivien and Wes, and she runs into him in her new temporary role at the Met.
Right. Yeah. So I thought that it was interesting because they were very different couples. As I mentioned before, Diana seems very ambivalent. And maybe it's just in the moment, maybe like a lot of people, she expected marriage to be something, and then it was not living up to what she thought it was going to be. But there's just definitely an ambivalence there. Whereas with Dale and Vivien, I thought that there was more, there was more substance in the beginning to what was going on there. And it seems like the couples, when they collide, it's just like, it's a crash that kind of shatters everybody's image of everything. And it was very funny. You use a lot of different formats. You use texting as a format. You use letters. Why did you decide to switch it up a bit?
Yeah, I think that I wanted those alternative format sections in general because my prose is very dense, and in keeping with, I kind of, in every aspect of this novel, wanted to have my cake and eat it too. and so to balance the depth and density of the prose sections, I needed something that was a little lighter, a little fluffier, a little more humorous to provide some a counterweight there. So having Wikipedia articles and Instagram Instagram captions and different formats interspersed throughout, I think it gave the novel a bit of levity, and broke up some of the tough slogging of my extremely long sentences.
No, actually, I think the novel had a lot of levity in it, specifically at the expense of somebody named Prudence Hyman.
Yes, poor Prudence Hyman. Yeah, no, I mean, if your name was that bad, and I mean, they make lots of jokes about her name in the novel. I mean, it's really hard to take someone named Prudence Hyman seriously
throughout the novel. Whenever she comes up,
she also has the last laugh, though.
Okay, so yes, she does. That was delightful. When you were thinking about the different characters, how did you first of all envision Vivien and Dale's relationship versus Wes and Diana's?
Yeah, so one of the first things I did, even before I started writing, was I did a lot of I'm a strategy consultant by training, and we always tend to think in 2x2 matrices. I mean, 2x2 matrices even come up in the novel in terms of thinking about guilt and innocence, and guilty seeming innocence and innocent seeming guilt. And I was thinking of the four main characters as a kind of matrix, and thinking of the background for each of them, and how for some characters that are they're meant to be echoes and mirrors of one another, right? And very, very similar. But I think one of the lines that I use in the novel directly is that nothing highlights difference quite like homogeneity. So I was trying to see if in 4 very similar characters, I could suss out those kind of micro differences that we all notice in each other that can make the difference between love and apathy, or or lust and disgust, and all of these, that it's such a fine line in many instances. So I think as I was writing them, the best, I guess, analogy I can give you is, I don't know if you're familiar with American Psycho, Bret Easton Ellis's novel. One of my favorite books. I think it's genius. And there's this really famous scene where the characters are comparing business cards, and they're like talking about the paperweight and the lettering, and all these business cards look the same, right? But they're touching in on every kind of nuance in them. So I pictured the 4 main characters like 4 of Bret Easton Ellis's business cards, fundamentally the same, but tinged with nuances that matter a great deal to them.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. And I thought, like, I mean, when Diana and Dale meet for the first time versus Natasha and Wes meet again, I would say, you could kind of see that, and just sort of the way that they're thinking about each other initially. Like with Dale, it's like, oh, like I should probably mention that I'm engaged and in love. That's like a thing I should probably mention. And with Dale and Vivien, it's like they're almost thinking about the past a little bit, and it was cool. It really was.
I'm
Cool.
so glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was pretty much what I was going to say. So I really do hope that we're just kind of giving the audience just like a taste of this, because this book is a lot of fun. If you like books about art, if you like literary fiction and myth, it's got a little bit of everything. And like I said, it is very funny.
Thank you. Yeah, we didn't talk about Julian, who I think is the centerpiece of the funny.
So why don't you talk about Julian a little bit?
Yeah. So Julian is, I would say, the 5th main character, who is the glue that holds the other 4 together. He knows all parties well, and starts to put together the pieces as the novel progresses. But he is very, in my opinion, he is extremely funny. He is based on my dear late friend Evan Thomas, who I dedicated the novel to. And many of his lines are actually, I started writing down things that Evan said in 2011 when we would go to brunch, which the characters do in the novel as well. And many of his actual lines from the real world made it into the novel. So art mirrors life, life mirrors art.
That's a really flattering way of remembering somebody.
I hope so. I mean, my goal, I write in the acknowledgments, my goal was nothing short of resurrection. I mean, it is, very much intended as a tribute of the highest respect.
And Julian's the one, I mean, when they're first like they're talking about Narcissus, and he says to Wes, like, oh, it's you.
Yeah, it looks like you.
Which was really great. Well, again, thank you so much for chatting with us. This was fun. Are you working on another book after this?
I'm working on a couple of things. I had a novel underway before the pandemic that was about a near future that didn't include it, about probability in basketball. And I'm still really into it, but I think until the pandemic's over, it's going to be hard for me to tackle it in earnest. So in the meantime, I've been writing more personal essay type stuff around the theme of delusions of grandeur. So it's they're kind of tangential to the novel, but nonfiction-ish. The first one was actually recently published a couple of weeks ago in The Common. So you can check that out. It's called Delusions of Grandeur.
Very cool. Actually, I'm wondering if we can put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Well, I look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you. Thanks so much for chatting.
You too. Question, as somebody who loves art and who has been to the Met, to somebody who you've worked there, do you have a favorite space there?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I have several. I love the Petrie Court, where the centerpiece of which is the Canova sculpture of Perseus with the head of Medusa. And it's a very famous sculpture. It features in the novel. Vivien at one point hides behind it to avoid her boss. So that's definitely one of my, and it's just like a gorgeous vaulted, very, space dripping with natural light. I love the Greco-Roman galleries. And I mean, who doesn't love the Temple of Dendor? The Temple of Dendor has some of my favorite memories of parties that I worked in membership. So we, got to work, or sometimes we'd attend for fun, various parties that are held there. And, nothing beats the Temple of Dendor for that sort of thing.
I agree. In general, when I do eventually get back there, that is the place I want to most take my children.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to taking my son to the Met someday, and
yeah,
walking him around.
Yes. Another question I wanted to ask was, so I mean, we've spoken a bit about why, for numerous reasons, Narcissus is still such a relevant story. Are there any other myths that you feel connected to as far as this time period? I know that you talk a little bit about other myths within the book.
Yeah. I mean, a few other myths feature prominently. I think that my top three all made it in, which are Narcissus and the Medusa myth and the Pygmalion myth. I actually see Pygmalion as being in many ways a mirror myth to Narcissus, and I explain this a bit in the novel, because with Pygmalion you have like idealized love turning a sculpture, the sculpture of Galatea, from art into life. And in the Myth of Narcissus, you have a really grotesque, corrupted kind of self-love that nonetheless succeeds at turning life into art, because Narcissus in his demise is often called the father of painting. Leon Battista Alberti called him that. And he's been endlessly painted and adored as an adored subject by painters for good reason. And I love Medusa. I explain this a bit in the book too, because Medusa is one of those myths that has an extra metamorphic quality, in that she seems to be able to symbolize anything you're looking to symbolize. She's so applicable to many different kinds of ideas. Like, she's been used to for feminist iconography. She's also been used to convey the opposite. She appears everywhere, it seems. Once you start looking for her, you see her everywhere. Speaking of, there's an amazing new sculpture in New York that inverts the famous Canova in Petrie Court, and has a beautiful intact Medusa carrying the head of Perseus.
That. So that's the Medusa sculpture that's it's in the front of New York City's criminal courthouse, I believe.
Yeah.
And
I haven't seen it in person yet, but
I've only seen pictures of it myself. I have not been into the city in quite some time. But the sculpture's creator, Luciano Garbati. Medusa is interesting because like she's kind of considered a villain when you like at first, but when you really consider her whole story, she got kind of a messed up deal. I mean,
absolutely raw deal. And this is why I love the idea, and in the museum of my mind, the exhibition in the novel, the famous Caravaggio of decapitated Medusa on the shield of Perseus is set up across from Bernini's bust. And Caravaggio's version is very much that villain Medusa, and Bernini's is the nymph that was raped in Minerva's temple, and really certainly by our modern standards is getting a super raw deal here. And I think it's the idea, in addition to having the shield and the sculpture as if she's turned herself to stone, which I love, and the kind of recursive quality between sculpture and painting there, and the viewer's role as Perseus when you stand and look at them. I think that it's a really interesting dichotomy, thinking of those two Medusas facing each other. The other myth that I really love and doesn't feature in the Portrait of Emir, but I'm thinking about a lot with the new novel I was working on before the pandemic, is the myth of Icarus, and the whole idea of flying too close to the sun and losing it all, I think is quite relevant to our modern.
Yes, it really is. Definitely. Well, when you are ready to restart that one, I do look forward to hearing about it.
Thank you.
Okay, so this was Jessica, and our guest today was...
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.